Hey everybody, welcome back. It is the Razzball Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I am Beaton, joined by the fantasy master Lothario himself, Blue Steel, Gray Albright. How's it going over there, Gray?
Good man, good to be here. I was just thinking I was trying to come up with an analogy before of like we're going from like the sexiest like top 20 of 2024, the last podcast. It's like we're having dessert and then we're having our vegetables, the catchers. It's not.
We went
It's
from
not.
Hansel to the school for ants. This is the school for ants.
Yeah, exactly. Do you hear my computer beep?
A little bit, yeah. Are you there?
I'm muted. I, yeah, I'm a work in progress, people. I'll just say it. I come across as very smart, but sometimes it's questionable.
Well, let's just go ahead and get into the thing that you know. We know you don't know computers, but you know some baseball. So let's just jump into that, Gray. Let's not put people through the technical difficulties that you and I go through trying to get this podcast done. All right,
Yeah.
so
We take 5 hours to do that 2 hour podcast.
let's start with position scarcity, Gray. It's like the biggest argument for catchers going early. Neither of us really buy it, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Why don't you go ahead and discuss what your viewpoint is on position scarcity and why you should still avoid catcher?
Yeah, I think actually I talk about this a little bit in the top 20 catchers. The top 20 catchers that goes to like 40, by the way. That just shows I like to keep it top 20 even though it goes to 40. I think I have a missing brain cell.
I
I
mean,
don't know
normal
why.
people would get this done in like 25, 40 minutes, somewhere in that range. It's going to take us at least an hour and a half. So it is what it is, Gray.
Yeah, the top 20 overall that we just did in the last podcast really was 20. We're about to do a top 20 catchers that is nowhere close to 20. Okay, anyway, position scarcity. So I think, like back when fantasy sports was just like in its infancy. I don't know who came up with quote unquote position scarcity, but I want to think that someone came up with it and they they thought and everyone was like, "Wow, that's really clever." And they were just like shoving that strategy down people's throats for like 15 years until and that was before there was any strategy. So people were like, well, there's position scarcity, right? Like that's it. That's all anyone ever mentioned. That was like the strategy. It was like that and showing up to your draft on time. That was all anyone knew. It was like be there at 10 a.m. and position scarcity. That's all I have written on my hand. That is literally it. So
Shortstops and catchers, baby. Shortstops and catchers.
yeah, it was like after Hanley Ramirez, is there anyone?
Joe Mauer, right? Like that's the next one. Right? Hanley, Joe Mauer, like that. Victor Martinez, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right there.
Victor Martinez. The anti-position scarcity. Yeah, so I think no, so I think with like position scarcity that it was the idea, the only idea that people had for so long that it's become so ingrained in people. But there really isn't. I mean, at the time, like when that was first discussed, it was like Mike Piazza hitting 40 homers and hitting 360, and like the 12th best catcher off the board would be hitting like 12 homers and 260. And it was like that was a big difference. Like between Mike Piazza and random catcher, no, like I don't know, Mickey Templeton or whoever was the catcher at the time. Like at the time, it was like that was a big difference. Then, so Mr. Position Scarcity might have even had a point at the time, but that is so far gone. Like that is no longer the situation anymore. That is like the difference between, and this is actually, so this is still talking about last year versus this year. But if you looked at the number one catcher last year was William Contreras. And I don't know off the top of my head, but I want to say he was drafted at like 250 overall. And that sort of gives you an idea of like where position scarcity is for catchers. Like there's no real scarcity. It's just like there's a similar chance of being number one. Like I was saying, I think I also said this in the post. Like it's like how in the top 20 there was Ronald Acuna Jr. and then everyone else. Well, in the catchers, it's just like there's everyone else. But why is my computer still beeping? I don't even know how to shut it off. I gotta. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I shut it off now. Okay. So, but I want to say that like I think with like Robert Acuna Jr. there was like one catcher. I mean, excuse me, Robert Acuna Jr. There was one guy, and then everyone was like fighting for number two. But with the catchers, it's just like everyone's just fighting for number one. It's like there's got to be at least 15 catchers who all have as good a shot as any to be in the number one slot. So like when I see ADP saying like Adley Rutschman is the number one catcher, and I'm sure other people's rankings will come out and will say something similar. And I see that and I'm like, why Adley Rush? Like why would you draft Adley Rutschman at like I don't know 60 overall? Now, granted, this is two catcher Adley Rutschman. This is a two catcher league ADP, yeah. So it's a little bit different than reality, or at least a little bit different than one catcher leagues. But still, you see Adley Rutschman at like number one across the board, like a lot. Like ADP is pretty set on him, and people are drafting him like he's the number one catcher. And you see that, and you're like, why would he why is he number one? Just because. Like why? Like I just said, William Contreras was number one. Like no one, like there's no one, like with a big flashing red light or flashing sign that says, this is the number one catcher. At least this year, there's no one. It's all just a group of guys who have like their pluses and minuses, which we'll talk about when we go over the actual catchers themselves, but. There's no one really that is just like even like past, like in recent past, there was JT Realmuto, and I didn't buy into him ever really being the number one catcher, even when he was the number one catcher, because steals are so fickle and a lot of his value is, based on that. But like even then, he wasn't like dramatically better than other guys that are all just like it's just like. There's catchers that are just this big group of guys, and anywhere from 75 overall to like 250 overall, they're all sort of the same thing. I mean, they all varying, like, one guy might give you 25 homers and a 240 average. Another guy might hit 21 homers and a 270 average. But more or less, I mean, it's all relatively the same thing. It's just a matter of like, what their counting stats might be or whatever. So, yeah, I guess that's a long way of saying there's no position scarcity. Sorry.
Yeah. And even, it was actually a great year for catcher in regards to what they normally produce, at least across the board. There's usually a few that kind of, do a little or fine, but it was number 57 on the player rater was the number one catcher, and then it jumped to 71. So we're like, even if we're looking at adding some value to a position, it's not 27, 30 plus positions in ADP. And that's assuming you get the right one, which again is very hard to do at catcher. It's similar to the argument at pitcher. And I would say I'm more in the camp of there's a replacement value that you need to find. Like you don't want the two worst catchers on your team necessarily if you can get kind of an average catcher for your league, but at the same time it really depends on where they're going. I've been in catcher heavy leagues and I'll end up with the 20th and the 24th catcher, and it just is what it is in those leagues. I'm not going to overreach for the numbers they're providing. And to your point, anybody can kind of jump up. Catcher is the hardest position to repeat year to year offensive stats because of all the work they have to do on the defensive side, and just the games played vary so much because of the work that they're doing defensively. That's so much more on their bodies, and they're maybe the one position other than pitcher that has planned days off like every week regularly.
Right. Yeah, no, completely. And I think there's something to like, and just from like, this is more anecdotal, but like last year I remember picking up Yanier Diaz off of waivers, and he ended up being good, in his limited time off of, like, if you were to take out the first month where he didn't play and you just had him from like May on, he was probably like a top 3 catcher. Anyway, I had him in one league, and this is anecdotal, but it didn't help me. Like a good catcher doesn't help like a good first baseman, is what I'm saying. Like a good catcher doesn't help like a good outfielder or any other position. Like I'm not going to go around the horn, but you know what I'm saying. Like it's like a good catcher, like William Contreras last year, 87th best player on the player rater. He was the same as Xander Bogaerts. So that gives you an idea of like, if you think about like Xander Bogaerts, like if you had him in a league last year, it was like he was good in April and a little bit in September, but he wasn't really very good. I mean, he was fine, like versus like some guys who are just flat out awful. He was fine. Like, don't get me wrong, but still he was like, him, William Contreras, or another guy who is at his level was Ian Happ. And it's like, yeah, I mean, Ian Happ was good. Don't get me wrong. He was fine. But no one was like coming out of the season last year and like, oh my God, Ian Happ, I can't wait to draft him again. So that was so great. Because like the top catcher it gives you kind of like really middling stats, even the top ones. And then the ones later on are middling as well, but at least you're not paying a price for them.
Yep. No, I completely hear you. I mean, in recent memory, the only one that I can recall that was of significant value for fantasy teams would have been the Salvador Perez year, where he hit just everything out of the park. And then people overvalued him the next year because he did that. And then, of course, he fell back down to normal levels. Like occasionally you'll get pop-up seasons. If you want to say exactly when those are happening, then you tell us, and that way we know. But otherwise, like it's a lot of, like you said, it's a lot of, do you want a little average? Do you want a little power? The guys who sit at the top of the order and play more generally are the ones who go off of the board earlier, but you can still find that as you go through the draft. It's not like an impossible situation as we're going through here.
Oh, yeah, and like Salvador Perez, that year he hit 48 homers and like 270. If you look at that year, it's like the following year, so that would have been 2022, the following year, everyone was drafting him like a top 25 player, and it was like, obviously we're not giving you advice for 2022 anymore. But at the time, if you go back and listen at the time, I guarantee you, I told you Salvador Perez was not a good pick in the top 25. But people always do this. They overrate, like right now, this is way off topic, but like right now, people are like looking at like Tariq Skubal's like September and they're like, well, he's an ace. Or like Cole Reagan's is like, 5-game stretch. And they're like, well, he's a number 2. But they always do this. They overrate guys based on like the previous year, which is, it's fine. But in like the big picture, if you look at like the catchers specifically, they're always like this, at least for the last like 10, 15 years. There's like 1 or 2 guys that are good. You never know who that guy's going to be. I'm sorry. Like you just mentioned with like, Salvador Perez, like there's the one guy who's going to pop off. No one ever knows who that guy is going to be. No one was saying last year, oh yeah, William Contreras is going to be the number 1 catcher in 2023. No one was saying that. Like it's like, it's all revisionist history if you were saying it. And then you look at guys and it's like one guy's going to pop off. No one knows who that is. So it's just like roll the dice and just draft a catcher after like 150, 200 overall. That's it. Just see what happens, man, because that's all you're going to get. Like, like I said earlier with Yannier Diaz, getting him off of waivers, like there's going to be a guy who will be off of waivers. You'll be able to plug and play at some point. It's just, yeah, but with all that said about how catchers don't matter, let's discuss them for the next hour and a half.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump into the rankings thing, right? Number 1 is Will Smith. Last year, he had 261, 19 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 80 runs, 76 RBI. You have him projected for 262, 21 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 82, 84. Rudy has him down at the number 7 catcher, and that just kind of goes to the point of there's a ton of guys that can move from 1 to like 12 to 15, and it's such a small difference. I mean, Will Smith is at catcher as consistent as it comes, Gray.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I ended up ranking him here at number 1 because he's consistent. The lineup's good. Dave Roberts gives him a ton of at bats. Usually, he usually stays fairly healthy. So that means a lot of runs and RBIs. And, as we saw last year with William Contreras being the number 1 catcher, really like runs and RBIs drive so much of this when it comes to catchers, at least. Like William Contreras last year was 289, 17 homers, 6 steals, 86 runs, and 78 RBIs. So like if that could be the number 1 catcher, you can't tell me that Will Smith can't be the number 1 catcher this year. I mean, all he needs to do is if he can get 480 at bats, like I have him listed for, like I have him projected for, like if he can do that, he absolutely is going to get the runs and RBIs that goes with being the number 1 catcher. I'm not saying it's an exciting line necessarily. I don't have like a ton of faith in Will Smith's upside. Like maybe I would have had maybe a year or 2 ago. I think, his floor, he's really a floor play, which is not really super exciting as the number 1 guy, but catchers, that's, if you're drafting a catcher, which I don't think you should. I don't think you should draft Will Smith. But if you were going to draft a number 1 catcher and a catcher in the top 100, I mean, I would go for a guy who at least I was guaranteed, good stats across the board minus, steals, but no catchers are really giving steals. I mean, even what I mentioned before, William Contreras having 6 steals. I mean, that's what 2 games from Ronald Acuna Jr. I mean, who cares? What's 6 steals? 6 steals isn't going to matter. So Will Smith gives you only 2 steals. So 4 steal difference? Who cares? It doesn't matter. So I had Will Smith number 1.
Yeah, it's not really the position to grab your steals. If you get a handful or, you happen to have Realmuto, then so be it. But you can get steals elsewhere. Not worth bumping up any of these guys for the minimal production that they give there. Number two for you is Yanier Diaz. Last year he had 282, 23 home runs. He had 51 runs, 60 RBIs. You have him projected for 278, 27 home runs, one stolen base, 64, 78, and 442 at bats. And he had 13 home runs in the second half. He had 301, 263, 10 home runs in the first half. So both actually very solid lines, and both in 52 games because he didn't start the season with them. I mean, he's looked as good as anybody else. No problem with him being up here at number two, and his average draft cost is significantly less than the number one catcher off the board, Adley.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, Adelaide right now. I just looked it up. It's 50 overall. Yanier Diaz is 110 overall. Um, but yeah, with I think Diaz. So I'm not drafting a catcher at this point in the rankings. If things go you were to fall to like 150 overall, and it's a two catcher league, I could see potentially drafting him. I like Yanier Diaz a lot. I would take him over. Well, I have him ranked second, but like if Adelaide Rushman and Yanier Diaz, which I think people might think is slightly crazy, but I would take Yanier Diaz. I like his upside seems much more interesting to me than Adelaide Rushman. Adelaide Rushman's upside feels like high floor guy, like which is fine. I mean, it's not a problem. That's what I was saying. So it's not like I hate what Rushman is doing. I just feel I think he's being overdrafted, absolutely. But Yanier Diaz to me looks like a guy who could potentially like. There's no reason why his average needs to bottom out. Like like you mentioned, he had 282 last year. He actually had a really good strikeout rate, and he's got great power, as you mentioned. He's got no speed, but no catchers really have speed outside of like Realmuto and a couple guys later on, but nothing really worth discussing. Yanier Diaz to me looks like a guy who could potentially break out in a little bit in a way like you would want from like a non-catcher, like like I wouldn't be shocked to see Yanier Diaz move up into a top 50 slot overall next year. Like he feels like a guy who could potentially take that next step, and his floor, it seems to me his floor is still fine. I don't think it's that risky of a draft pick, to be honest. But I don't know if I'm necessarily going to draft him because he's going at 110, like I just mentioned, and I wouldn't go for a catcher until about 150 overall in a two catcher league, and in a one catcher league, I'm not drafting until probably like 200 overall for a catcher. So I likely don't get Diaz in most leagues just because of it's just the way I draft. But if I were in a two catcher league and Yanier Diaz was looking at me after like a couple of the top catchers were off the board, and I if I were the type to want to take a catcher early or at least at like 110, Yanier Diaz looks real good. I like him a lot. I kind of wish he weren't a catcher, because I feel like he's getting bumped up a little bit because of catcher. So if he were like just an outfielder or a first baseman, I think he'd probably be going like around 170 or something overall. And I would be really interested in drafting him if he were just like a first baseman or something. But because he's a catcher, it's he's getting bumped up, and I don't think I'm probably going to end up drafting him, but I'm pretty interested in him, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I like Diaz. He showed like the potential in the second half. I mean, if we just play good old Mr. Prorator on a 301 average and 13 home runs, that's looking at like 28 to 30 home runs, and a guy who hits for a high average. I mean, that's a pretty good, way to have your catcher. Maybe the only downside is he's projected to be, I think sixth in the Astros lineup right now. So maybe the counting numbers aren't quite there to make him take the full step. But I mean, if you got, your current projection, which is 278, 27 out of him, I think you can deal with having a few less runs and RBIs if that's the downside. And if he does that, it's definitely possible he moves up in the lineup.
Right. Yeah. No. Agreed.
All right, number 3 is everybody else's number 1. That is Adley Rutschman. Last year he had 277, 20 home runs, 1 stolen base, 84 in 80. This year you have him projected for 20 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 77, 74, and a 270 average. Rudy has him as his number 1. He's the first catcher off the board at NFBC. As you mentioned, he's going right around 50. He's gone as early as 30 within the last month. Based on your projections and Rudy's projection, you're both expecting a little bit of regression even for Adley instead of the step forward that it seems like the rest of the world keeps saying that that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess not. I mean, I don't know. Is the rest of the world saying like? I mean, I don't know what the rest of the world is saying, to be honest.
I mean, if they're taking him at 50, you got to
like,
think they're
about
thinking
just about like literally any subject. I don't know what the rest of the world say, but like if I look at Steamer projections, they don't look that far off from me. Like, what are you seeing that other people are saying?
I mean, I think in general, people are just expecting, given the prospect pedigree of Rushman, the Orioles kind of, their playoff and their build towards being a competitive team, and their lineup looks a lot better nowadays. Like they're expecting him to really take that step forward and almost put up, I would say, similar line to what you have for Yadier Diaz, which would be, upper 20s, low 30s home runs and being, 1, 2, 3 in the lineup. That's basically what I'm hearing about Adley. They're just projecting him to be Diaz, but in a better part of the lineup.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's possible. It goes back to like how excited can you be about a guy like Adley Rutschman? I can't get that excited about him. I don't know. I see his projections for me, 2270, and he has no speed. So, that's whatever, like I keep saying, but still, he's got no speed. So 2270, I have him for. He just went 2277. So even if he were to take a step forward and say, and Steamer has him also for like 2270. So I'm not really that far off from anyone else. But let's say, I don't know, 25 270. Let's say 25 280. 25 280. So if you look at like that, and he's going at, what was it, like 40 overall, 50, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere just inside top 50.
So okay, so if you take that and 25 280, and then you look at like a first baseman who is giving you 25 280, like who, Paul Goldschmidt, he's going, and and by the way, Goldschmidt also gives you steals, and Goldschmidt's done it for like a decade, but maybe that's why people are a little bit further down on Goldschmidt. But anyway, Goldschmidt's going 30 picks after. Christian Walker's going 40 picks after. Tristan Casas is going 60 picks after. I don't think any of those guys are that different than the lines I just said for Adley Rutschman. Like it still feels like there's an inflation on catcher that I just can't get behind. Like Adley Rutschman, I have him for 2270. So that's what I ranked him for. But even if you were to give him 25 280, it's still like with no speed whatsoever, by the way. And also at catcher, so you have to assume more days off than the average first baseman. But that's nowhere like, I mean, Vlad Guerrero Jr. is going at the same spot as Adley Rutschman. Like what? Like that doesn't. I mean, and I'm not a huge Vlad. I mean, we'll get to the first baseman, but I'm just using them as an example. Like you get like further into the first baseman even, and it's like how different is like I don't know. Alec Baum is 22 homers, 280 hitter, and he's going 120 picks after Adley Rutschman. I don't know. I don't see the inflation. I'm not paying for it, and I'm not into Adley Rutschman. If he were to go off and hit 40 homers and 300 plus this year, then all the more power to the people drafting him. But that's what they're drafting with that ideal. I don't see it necessarily. So I'm not in on him.
I would agree. I mean, for the line that you're projecting, I'm a little bit more in on him, but like my line's not that far off. I'm basically the upside of what you said, which is like 275 and 23 to 25. And that's giving him a little bit of credit because it's not like there was a power outburst at any point. You look at all the underlying numbers, hard hit, average exit, hard hit rates, fly ball, line drive. Like none of that says he should be hitting 30 home runs. Like if he gets to 25, he's actually probably had a little bit of batted ball luck. Now he is a young top prospect, so certainly there's some room for growth, but he's 25. He's not 22 like stepping into a man's game. He's 25. Like I don't know that we see catchers necessarily take, you know, 10 to 12 home run steps very often.
Right. And I narrowed it down to first baseman, but if you were to take Adley Rutschman and open it up, you see after him is Nolan Jones is going after him. Nolan Jones just went 2020 in a abbreviated season. Adley Rutschman just hit 20 homers and that's it. So you're like Nolan Jones, and I understand Nolan Jones has the BABIP, high BABIP, all that. I mean, I get it. I've gone over these players. Trust me, I know the downsides and the upsides here. But Adley Rutschman is never going to give you 20 steals, and that was Jones in only 2/3 of a season. I mean, it's like that's crazy. That for people to be looking at that, they're only doing it because he has catcher after his name. If you were to take catcher away from Adley Rutschman, I don't know how far he's falling, but he's nowhere near is he going in the top 50 overall. Like that's ludicrous.
From a line perspective, like is there any difference between him and Brandon Nemo?
No, there's not. That's what I'm saying.
Like
and that's kind of where I have them ranked overall. Like Adley Rutschman, if you take his numbers and you just see 20 homers and 270 with 2 steals, you take that and you look at who he's comparable to, and you're like, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You're like looking at like the Brandon Nemos of the world, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, yeah. Or Yandy Diaz. And you're like, huh. But Yandy Diaz is going at like 130 overall, and he has a higher floor for average. I don't know, man. Adley Rutschman, I get the prospect pedigree and people expecting more from him, but I don't know. I think for a catcher in the top 50, you got to show it to me before I'm getting involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and move to number 4, which is JT Realmuto. Last year he hit 20 home runs, 16 stolen bases, 70, 63, and hit 252. You have him projected for 21 home runs, 15 stolen bases, 73, 67, and a 250 average. You have him at number 4. He's currently going as the number 2 catcher on NFBC. I don't really have a problem with that because if we take his line from last year, it's 5 stolen bases off of the line that everybody was going crazy for drafting last year. Like it's fine.
I know. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, exactly. It's like everyone was going nuts for JT Realmuto, drafting him in like the top 25. And only difference between that insane year and last year is 5 steals.
It's literally 5 steals. Like that's the difference.
Now people are like, yeah, I mean he's okay.
He's fine. Like I take him. Like he's literally still the same guy. Like he's a year older, but
yeah, and not to like put this crap on him, but I mean if you were to take his name away, his line looks really similar to like Dalton Varsho. Like, I mean, it's okay. Don't get me wrong, Dalton Varsho is okay, but no one's drafting Dalton Varsho like and getting excited about it the way they do with
Well,
like JT
last year they did.
Realmuto. Right? No, I know, but I'm saying like this year
Not this
you're
year
looking at it and
without
you're
catcher
like, oh, yeah,
eligibility. Yeah,
yeah.
Dalton Varshaw's, he's an afterthought, somebody who you can fill out an outfield with, but not a key piece. And moving on to number 5, which is the number 1 from last year, William Contreras. Last year he had 289, 17 home runs, 6 stolen bases, 86, 78. You have ejected for 18 home runs, 5 stolen bases, 78, 71, and a 282 average. He had 314, 8 home runs, 5 stolen bases, 47, 46 in the second half. So he just killed it in the second half to really put his push on. And I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the tape because I know I was big on William Contreras last year. I know I didn't have him at 1 or anything, but I know I was pushing him. So I'm glad that he performed well. I think something that we're going to discuss kind of maybe moving forward from here is like first half, second half splits on catcher is brutal, Gray. I feel like the best sign for a second half catcher is that they had a really crappy first half and you just trade for those guys or pick them up off of waivers because some guys were really bad and just turned it around or vice versa.
Yeah, I kind of wonder the worst. I feel like the worst the lineup. No, maybe not because Adelaide Rushman lineup is good too. It's just like William Contreras. It's like he's like the perfect situation for like not the best of lineups, but good enough but where they value what he does, which is, he's solid for average. So it's like they put him in a good spot in the lineup because of that. Whereas like, other guys who maybe, I don't know, say Luis Campuzano, who's I definitely said that right. But he's going, he's not going to probably hit in the top of the lineup. Oh, maybe he will actually, because that lineup's terrible now. Nah,
Really
okay,
bad.
yeah, okay. Let's say Tyler Stevenson. He's not going to hit in the top of the lineup, and for a long time, everyone thought he was a 300 hitter. He's coming off a bad season after coming off an injured season, so it wasn't that long ago. People thought he was a 290 hitter though, and he's in a good park. The lineup's good, but he's not going to hit towards the top of it. More than likely he's going to start at the bottom or at least towards the bottom. But you look at William Contreras, like if you were to put William Contreras in a potentially a better lineup, like, and he moves down in that lineup, he's nowhere near as interesting for counting stats. And he is getting so driven by counting stats. Like he really doesn't have he doesn't have much room for error when it comes to at bats. Like if he doesn't get his at bats, which should mean good runs and RBIs, then his value is gonna bottom out. And I like him. I like William Contreras. I liked him a lot last year too. I don't know how aggressive I was in liking him last year, but I did like him. Obviously not as a number 1 catcher, but I liked him because he was going at like 250 overall, which is like that's a
Perfect
good
spot.
place. Yeah, it's like a perfect spot to draft a catcher. You're like, oh, okay, well I filled everything else. Let me see what catchers are left. So William Contreras was really interesting then. Now he's a little bit less interesting because of his ADP, but he's still like, as long as he stays healthy and gets those at bats, because he's really a floor play of like, runs and RBIs, not really going to be great for power, not really great for speed, solid for average, but average is going to drive the other things. So he has to get those at bats. So as long as he's good for at bats, like, if you were to take his name away and then move in like, I don't know, like say Sean Murphy, who's going like 100 spots later, like Sean Murphy's numbers and his the projections, at least the projections aren't really dramatically different. And it's like you're looking, Yeah, how much name value does William Contreras have? Apparently, he's got some because people are drafting him. And I don't mind him in the big picture if he were going later in drafts. I guess I'm being a little bit negative on William Contreras now because he is going higher, and he's not really that exciting upside wise. He's fine, but he's really sort of like, you know, I have in the rankings I say he's Elias Diaz, 200 picks earlier. And it's kind of like, I mean, Elias Diaz is probably a 260 hitter versus 280. Elias Diaz is probably a 16 or, I don't know, maybe 15 homers versus 18 homers of Contreras, but they're really not that dramatically different. Like if Elias Diaz gets 480 at bats and happens to luck into runs and RBIs, and he's in cores, he's going like 170 picks after William Contreras. So it's like William Contreras is okay, but I wouldn't get too wrapped up in his name value, which he shouldn't even really have at this point.
Yeah, it's just like it's a safety play, and as you mentioned, like the lineups and there's like the perfect area for him to be up in the lineup and get runs and RBIs, but not so good that he's going to get demoted to eighth or ninth. And he's in a great park too. That helps a lot because if he moved to Seattle, like I would then like go from 17 home runs last year and then becomes 13, 12, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, he really, really needs those counting stats then. Um, but I mean, he put up the number one catcher season last year, so we know it's possible, and nothing's really changed from last year to this year. Moving on to number 6, this is a new tier for you. A guy who has also been number one catcher before, which is Salvador Perez. He had 255, 23 home runs, 59 runs, 80 RBIs. This year, you have projected for 27 home runs, 73, 82, and a 251 average. This is actually Rudy's number 3 catcher coming in at 258 and 24. So pretty much in line with what he did last season for Rudy, and really not that far off for your projections either. You just have him down a little bit further. I mean, Sal Perez is fine. I mean, he should get the at bats. It's another situation where the lineup is actually improving, but it's not so good where he's going to get dropped to the bottom, or at least maybe he'll drop
Yeah.
some, but not getting bottomed out.
Yeah, no, I think he's probably still got 30 homer power if he can stay on the field, and he does play a lot if he's healthy. He's as he's gotten older, he's gotten a little bit more banged up. He's missed a little bit more playing time. Anyway, on the we have a new tool. We have new tools actually in the on Razzball for monthly hitters and pitchers. So what it shows you is who were the best hitters and pitchers for a month. Right now it's showing for last year because obviously no data yet for 2024. But so anyway, so I just looked up catchers. So Salvador Perez was the best catcher for 1 month last year. It was in May. William Contreras was actually second best, much worse, but he was second best in September. And then Francisco Alvarez in July was third best, also much worse. But anyway, Salvador Perez was the best catcher for best catcher for 1 month. So let me see. So the best month from a catcher, Salvador Perez in May, was the 96th best hitter month last year. On par with Lars Nootbaar's July. So, and that sort of gives you an idea. So even like the best catcher for 1 month, it's barely a top 100 hitter month overall. And it's just like, so, and Salvador Perez is fine. He had a big month of May apparently. His month of May was by and far his best month. He hit 9 home. And also the tool has the stats as well. He hit 9 homers and 302 in the month of May. So it was a good month. No steals because I can't even imagine Salvador Perez running. That doesn't seem possible. I mean, maybe if Ozzy Albies were covering second, I could see Perez like potentially. Oh, that sounds awful. Actually, him colliding with anyone, let alone Ozzy Albies. But anyway, Salvador Perez, no speed, but good power. So I mean, that was the best month for any catcher last year. 9 homers, 0 steals, and a 302 average.
Do you know what he did the
18 runs,
next month, Gray?
18 runs, 18 runs, 18 runs and 19 RBIs. Yeah, I have all of them.
No,
June
I
was
I
really
have it
awful.
pulled up. I was asking you.
Yeah, no, I have them in front of me. Yeah, no,
So
June was awful.
his next month,
Like really
he hit
bad.
185 with 3 home
Yeah,
runs. So
yeah,
just like to my to like the researching when I was looking at this, like the best predictor of a bad month is a catcher coming off of a good one because it seems the way it happened like repeatedly. And I'm not going to say this happens every year, but again, it's a very demanding physical position. So for them to go out there and hit great every month and every first half, second half is so much harder than a regular
hmm
everyday player.
yeah,
Uh,
no, completely. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. It's like it's such a demanding position, and also the demanding position, that aspect means less at bats too. So it's like, and at bats fuel fantasy value. So yeah, it's not great. So yeah, Salvador Perez. Anyway, that's
yeah,
that's right.
moving on. Number 7 is Logan O'Hop. Last year, he had 236, 14 home runs, 23 runs, 29 RBIs, abbreviated stint. This year, you have him projected for 23 home runs, 1 stolen base, 64, 75, and 258. 16 games in April, he hit 283 with 5 home runs. 35 games at the end of the year, he hit 217 with 10 home runs. The one consistency was that he just smashed the ball out of the field. I don't, 283 versus 217 paints a very broad scope of where that can land. But if you're just looking for power from the catcher position, this is one of the better bets, I feel like.
Yeah, no, completely. I actually really like him. I I will never overdraft a catcher. Like if he's there when I'm drafting a catcher, then I'll happily draft Logan O'Hop. I will never reach for a catcher. But I'm excited about drafting him if I can get him at a reasonable price. Like if he's there at like, wherever for I feel like he's probably his ADP is right now it's at 164. So yeah, so I would take him as my first catcher in a 2 catcher league at 164. That sounds fine. I would happily draft that. And then in a 1 catcher league, his draft price will be cheaper than 164. I don't but I would draft him though. If he's there at like after 200 overall in a 1 catcher league, sure, I have no problem. I like him. I think in my rankings I talk about how like he's like the one hitter on the Angels who I'm actually excited about. he's like, and not actually not only hitter, pitcher as well. He's like the only player I'm interested in on the Angels. I mean, if Mike Trout is healthy, then I'm fine drafting Mike Trout for where his ADP is right now. But for the most part, O'Hop, I think that's it, man, for the Angels.
What 1 through 3 in the Angels rotation will always get me. It really, I mean, like right now it's Reed Detmers, Griffin Canning, Patrick Sandoval. Like I guarantee I'll have shares of all 3 of them. It's just the way that it works. And I don't know why. I don't like the Angels. I don't particularly think they're a good organization or anything, but I just end up with a few of their pitchers every year in different places. And I feel like random note here, Logan O'Hop is like the one catcher who gets a cool name boost. Like people will see him in the draft room who have no idea what to do and be like, I'm taking him because I like his name.
Excuse me, Nick Fortes. Hello. Yeah.
Not the
Or
next guy on your list. The next guy on your list gets downgraded. Like, I don't want to own this guy. His name is terrible. And that's Keeper Ruiz.
Keeper.
Uh, It sounds like Qbert. It sounds like a video game in the 1980s. But last year, Qbert hit 260, 18 home runs, one stolen base, 55-67. You have him down for 18 home runs, three stolen bases, 61-72, and a 264 average. Another first half second guy, 226 in the first half, hit 300 in the second half.
Yeah, he actually, if I remember correctly, I think he had some prospect pedigree when he first was, when he was Dodgers, and then he got traded. I guess they did. They did want him for a reason, I guess. This is assuming the Nats know what they're doing, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm fine. It's like it's ADP sort of related at this point. Like if he's there at the right spot, I'm fine drafting him. Like these are kind of like whatever. That's fine. I can't get excited about Ruiz, but I also would be like, yeah. I mean, I can convince myself by looking at his numbers. It's like if I have him projected for 18 homers, 3 steals, and a 264 average, I can convince myself that that's not really that different than Will Smith. So it really isn't. I mean, so I'm fine drafting him. I wouldn't exactly be excited. I wouldn't like tell the draft to pause for a second so I could do a victory lap around my desk. But yeah, it'd be okay.
Yeah, and he is only 25, so there, like you said, he was at one point, if not the top prospect in the national system, one of their top three. And I mean, he definitely has great patience at the plate, doesn't strike out. So like the average seems very safe. He went from 7 home runs to 18 from 2022 to 2023. Some of that could be the ball and the pitching and pitch clock and all of that, but he did make that step. So yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at it and you're like 260, 18, it sucks that he's in the Nationals lineup. But other than that, it's not that far off from what you're getting from, like you said, Will Smith. So we can go ahead and move on. Number 9 is Jonah Heim. Last year he had 258, 18 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 61-95. This year I'm projected for 19 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 58, 74, and 239 and 441 at bats. Another kind of first half, second half gray. First half, he hit 282, 12 home runs. Second half, 217, 6 home runs. Jonah Heim was like on his way. We were like, breakout catcher. It's going to happen. And if you traded for him at the All-Star break, I'm sorry.
Yeah. If you traded for a catcher, you deserved it.
If you traded for William Contreras, you did all right. Everybody else, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no sympathy for you. Unless you were trading another catcher. If you were like, yeah, how about Bo Naylor? No. Okay, so Jonah Heim. To me, maybe because I picked him up off of waivers in our RCL league, but to me, he feels like a kind of guy who you draft and you're like, woo, just locked up 20 homers. What's up? And you start doing the robot. And then you get to like May and you're like, I think I'm going to drop him. I'm going to drop him for just a random catcher who happens to be hot. I don't care. Like he feels like a guy who you're excited about for like maybe a moment in time that you think you've done well by drafting him at like 220 overall. And then at the end of the day, it's like, he's still just he's just a catcher. He's fine. I don't see, I mean, maybe the upside is like, if he gets into, power, maybe if the power, gets even, bigger. I don't know if it can though. Honestly, I feel like he's sort of maxed out. But maybe if the power gets bigger and his contact is like not awful and he hits for a decent average, I mean, I could convince myself that he's no different than Will Smith.
Yeah, I mean, if he just hits for better contact, average, power, strikes out less, changes ballparks and teams, I could definitely see it. Like, he could definitely be a different player altogether. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it feels possible. But actually, Jonah Heim last year he was 150 overall on the player rater. It's like that's I mean that is he was such a whatever pick, and he's still a whatever pick. But I mean that shows you that like to be a top 10 catcher, you really don't have to do much. I mean it's like that's pretty much it. You just have like
Play every day.
if you get the at bats, you have a half a chance of being a top 10 catcher. Actually, Jonah Heim was the sixth best catcher, so you have a chance of being like a top 5 catcher if you get the at bats. So
Yeah,
yeah,
the,
I
the
mean,
95 RBIs that definitely helped
didn't
drive up
hurt.
the value there.
No.
Number 10, which is a new tier for you, Wilson Contreras. Last year hit 251, 20 home runs, 5 stolen bases, 64, 66. You have him projected for 20 home runs, 5 stolen bases. That sounds very familiar. 248, 61, and 71. I mean, first half he hit 240, second half he hit 309, Gray. And being a Cubs fan, having watched Wilson Contreras for a very long time, that feels very on brand for Wilson Contreras. Like you're going to get a half a season that's really good offensively, and then the average is going to bottom out, and he's just going to be a power bat.
Yeah, and if you draft him, you can may as well just erase Ali Marmol's phone number from your phone because he's never going to talk to you again. He will never talk to you if you draft Wilson Contreras. He hates him so much. I think Contreras is honestly. I feel like if you were next year, we'll look at Wilson Contreras and William Contreras, and they could easily be flip flopped in the rankings, and it'll be
Yep.
like, yeah, uh, and yet people. I mean, and we say that, but yet people are drafting William Contreras at 80 overall, ADP, and Wilson Contreras is 150 overall. So it's like, I don't know. Like, is anyone drafting William Contreras and being like, "Whew, I'm glad I got the good one." Like they're the same thing. It's the same thing. Like there's really no like the only difference is probably 30 points in average. But even that, I mean, average is so fickle. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, Wilson Contreras. I would draft him if he were there after 200 overall.
Yeah, I mean it is the average is fickle, and you're seeing that in these first half, second halves, along with just catcher volatility. Number 11 is MJ Melendez. Last year he had 235, 16 home runs, 6 stolen bases, 65, 56. You have him projected for 18 home runs, 7 stolen bases, 83, 61. First half, 206, 6 home runs, 4 stolen bases. Second half, and less plate appearances, 273, 10 home runs, and 2 stolen bases. The best predictor of a good second half is a bad first half, and it just continues. But I mean, again, Melendez is he's kind of again in that lineup position where like he's in the right place to where he should get the at bats throughout the season.
Yeah, no, completely. I think there's a little bit of upside with him. I also
Oh yeah,
should say that like in not all leagues is he catcher eligible. He's got the Yahoo catcher eligibility. So that's why he's here and he's not going to be in many places as a catcher.
he's probably not playing
But
catcher.
yeah, and he's probably going to lose even Yahoo's. Well, even I guess you only need like a half a game. You
For
just
3 years or 5 years or so.
you need you just need the manager to like write your name near the catcher
Or
spot.
think about writing your name on it.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think Melendez is kind of interesting. Like he has actually upside. I don't know if we're ever going to see anything from it. Like he's got some contact issues. Like his average is kind of and I don't know if the power is really going to like get better, but yeah, I think he could. I think there's some upside here potential, but again, it's like it's more about his ADP. Why fielder, he's like maybe in the top 60 for outfielders. He's barely He's like still a top 12 catcher. It's so bad. Catchers are really bad. But MJ Melendez is like, maybe there's some upside. That's all I'll say about him.
Yeah, I mean, he does have legitimate power upside. He did hit 41 in the minors in a season, so there's definitely power upside. If we'll see if that ever actually translates into MLB power. But there, like you said, there's some potential upside, and that's something that doesn't really happen that often at catcher to have 30 plus home run power upside or any kind of real upside as we keep going through this list beyond like, oh, they could be Will Smith or, oh, like they could basically be a catcher. Great. Cool. Moving on. Number 12 is Cal Raleigh. Last year, he had 232, 30 home runs, 78, 75. You have him projected for 27 home runs, 67, 77, and a 229 average. 11 home runs in 77 games in the first half grade, 19 home runs in 68 games in the second half. So nine less games, 8 more home runs. I mean, we're in like the power index here. These like the Melendez, Raleigh, and the guy next two guys we're going to talk about are, or maybe just next time, but we're in the power range if you're willing to just bottom out your average potentially.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was curious. I had forgotten where Cal Riley's ADP is, and I don't know, and at NFBC, which is a two catcher league, so it's skewed. Like I keep saying, but Cal Riley's going much higher than I have him ranked. I didn't realize it. He's going above Salvador Perez. He's going at 135 overall. So yeah, I don't think I'm drafting him over there, but yeah, I mean, if he were after 200, I mean, Cal Riley, I think, in a two catcher league, you do what you have to do. But in a one catcher league, if you're looking at Cal Riley and you're not seeing a guy who has 30 homer power, but also is going to do he's going to hit 170 for like 3 weeks in a row, and you're going to be like, can I drop him? And I'm going to be like, yes, you absolutely can drop him. Like, he's fine if he is hitting for power, but there's going to be stretches here where he's going to hit for a terrible average. And yeah, I mean, I just don't see people holding a Cal Raleigh like in most shallower leagues, which is, at the end of the day, my rankings are for one catcher leagues more or less. I do say where to draft a second catcher, but in reality, it's a different game. A two catcher league. It's like Cal Raleigh has guaranteed at bats in the middle of the lineup. He's kind of interesting for a two catcher league. In a one catcher league, you're gonna get so bored of him so fast. You're gonna be like, yeah, he's okay, but I don't know. It looks like Gabriel Marino is hot on waivers. Should I pick him up? Like, yeah, go ahead. I don't get. So yeah, Cal Raleigh's fine for your first catcher in a two catcher league, and if he's there later, I guess if you need power, sure.
Yeah, I do have him a little bit higher than you. I have him up at 7, and it's for the upside. Catcher gets, again, so boring. So rather than rank the 5 other guys who could put up, Will Smith, if we close our eyes and dream on it type of season, I just will put Cal Raleigh above him. That's what happened there. Number 13 is Francisco Alvarez. He hit 209, 25 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 51, 63. You have him projected for 32 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 61, 66, and 217. First half, 17 home runs. Second half, 8 home runs. And second half is less, less games, but not generally half your home runs less. 238 in the first half, 174 in the second half. I mean, this is one of the top, hitting catcher prospects that we've seen in a while. There's definitely some upside here. Is this primarily what you're going for, or just like, again, there's some upside and power here?
Yeah, no, I think if he manages to like better his contact rate and gets to like I don't know 240 ish, then I mean I do have him projected for 32 homers. So yeah, I mean that he could sniff the top of the catcher. I could see him being a top catcher potentially next year going into drafts and then really never being able to draft him. That's that is our fate. Our fate is to try and get the top catcher and then never be able to draft him again. Yeah, I could see Francisco Alvarez doing really, if he can make contact, he has huge power. I wouldn't be shocked to see him hit, 35 plus homers at some point. Like it's there. Even Steamer, which is pretty conservative when it comes to prospects and guys with like not as long of a track record. I mean, even Steamer's projecting him for a lot of power, considering like 25 homers and 407 at bats or something. It's like that's a decent amount of homers considering them being conservative. So yeah, I think 30 homers is definitely within striking distance for him. But if also on the other end, I mean, I feel like he could be the second coming of Gary Sanchez. Like
Yeah.
if he hits 185, it also wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He didn't have huge K numbers. 26% isn't the end of the world as far as strikeouts go. It just needs better contact. And he hit 240 or 238 in the first half, so there's certainly a path to him doing it. Just needs to continue to improve, and he's young enough that can certainly happen.
Gary Sanchez has a career 26% strikeout rate.
Really, I would have guessed his was like 32%.
No, but I think similar to Gary Sanchez is the issue that I think I want to let me confirm. But yeah, like Alvarez hits a ton of like fly balls. He actually hits a lot of ground balls too. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean
the uppercut,
it's not
huge
the best.
uppercut.
Yeah, it's not the best of contact, even though it's his launch angle it doesn't seem that pronounced, but yeah, Alvarez just doesn't make great. It just seems like he doesn't make the best of contact. Like his infield fly balls aren't good. Yeah, I don't know. He's still young enough. Like I still have faith in him, but I'm also not drafting him until like 200 overall. So,
Right, right.
take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. Number 14 for you is Bo Naylor. Last year in 67 games, he hit 237, 11 home runs, 5 stolen bases, 33-32. You have him projected for 16 home runs, 10 stolen bases, 54, 62, and a 242 average. Bo Naylor is one of the few, stolen base, at least to a certain extent, options. As we mentioned, it's not to a significant amount. It's not enough to really, make a huge difference, but he's going to give you, some.
Yeah, no, completely. I was just thinking about how the difference between drafting and like in season. Like I feel like I don't remember exactly, but I feel like fab wise, like bidding on Bo Naylor in season, I think I probably put like 100 something dollars. Like something like I had to have Bo Naylor like when he came up for whatever reason. I don't even remember why I needed him. But
Because you
someone
drafted Nick Fortes.
yeah, probably. No, probably because I drafted Alejandro Kirk.
Kurt. Yeah, yeah, that's
But
awesome.
but Bo Naylor, like now seems so whatever. But when you're in season and you're looking at guys to replace guys, you're like, oh my god, you got to get Bo Naylor. Like Bo Naylor is so whatever. Anyway, yeah, he's like he I mean, I could see a 250 year from him, which is, not really that far off from JT Realmuto. So, yeah, I like Bo Naylor if the price is right. I don't mind it. He's going late enough where I could see drafting him. I don't, if you were to say to me like you can't get Bo Naylor, you have to get Jonah Heim, I'd be like, okay, sure. Or if you can't, or you can't get Bo Naylor, you have to get Tyler Stevenson. I'm like, all right, whatever. I don't care. It's like it's fine. I'm not really that excited either way, but I could see Bo Naylor having a decent year. Like he seems like he had the prospect pedigree that everyone seems to be clamoring over for, like Adelaide Rushman, like Bo Nail, like okay, Rushman was higher. Granted, he was like a number one prospect, but Bo Naylor also had some pedigree, and people were excited about him not that long ago. It's just everyone's totally forgotten that.
Yeah, prospect pedigree is very fickle. It leaves very quickly. Um, number 15, Sean Murphy. This is the case for my first half, second half splits, and where the whole thing started for me because I knew it happened because I own Sean Murphy. 251, 21 home runs, 65, 68 altogether. Not a bad line. You have him projected for 19 home runs, 63, 71, and a 250 average. I am almost positive. I think I could actually go back and check with the new tools now because this is one of the reasons I asked Rudy to for these updates on the tools. Is I'm pretty sure he was the number one catcher at the All-Star break. He was hitting 306. He had 17 home runs. There were people trading for him, and then in the second half, I will say he had a hamstring issue in June, and you can almost mark like the turn to the injury. But he hit 159 with 4 home runs the rest of the season, Greg.
Yeah, no, I remember. I think you're right. I remember him being the best catcher in the league at the All-Star break, and it was like so
He
good.
was he was killing it. I mean, 17 home runs, 306. That's pretty solid first half for a catcher.
Yeah, yeah, he was really good. This is also the end. This is like at this point, this is the end of like the first catcher, or excuse me, the in one catcher leagues. This is the point where they stop. This is the 15th catcher. I do like 12 catchers up until like overall. I think it's like 275 overall. So in the top 275, I usually have 12 catchers because one catcher per team, and no one should be drafting two catchers in a one catcher team in a one catcher league. But this year, I will say this for catchers, like unlike past years, this year feels like they're not that they're great at the top, but they are really solid from like 1 through 15. Like it feels like a year unlike other years where it doesn't feel like there's a huge drop off between the first and 15th catcher. I think after Sean Murphy, for me at least, I broke that into a new tier, and I think the next guys are like the second catcher in two catcher leagues, and I don't think they're number one catchers anymore, starting at 16, the next catcher. So I think, but I think Sean Murphy, for a 15th catcher off the board, like you mentioned his first half, and I agree. For a 15th catcher off the board, he's really good. I mean, he's a solid 15th catcher. I don't think it's been like this for a while. I'm not saying the catchers are great, but there's decent depth versus other years where there's even more of a reason to not draft a top catcher because you can't tell me there's a real difference between the 8th catcher and the 15th catcher. They're the same thing. I mean, it's like I broke them up into tiers a little bit because there's some guys I think have a little bit more upside. Wilson Contreras, I don't think has as much upside as maybe a Keibert Ruiz. You disagree probably. Logan O'Hoppe, I think, has more upside than say Cal Raleigh. You might disagree with that, but people will disagree with it, here and there. But I think the 15 catchers, in general, they're all pretty close. I mean, some, like we mentioned earlier, there's going to be a guy like a William Contreras who's going to jump out with the counting stats, and there's going to be certain guys who are, who might jump out and be better than others. But for the most part, looking at like the second catcher off the board versus the 13th catcher. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of difference between Yanier Diaz and Francisco Alvarez, but is there 250 picks difference? I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like 1 through 15 here. In I feel like I've said this, we've said this, but like there's a case where you close your eyes and at the end of the season you can see 1 through 15, any of these guys being the number one. Maybe a few guys based on they're in very bad lineups, or maybe they're in too good of lineups and they're hitting too far down. But other than like a couple of items there, which can, an injury here, an injury there, or a trade, and all of a sudden that's out the window. Like any of these guys could pop up and be number one. It wouldn't surprise me 1 through 15. I mean, we just talked Sean Murphy's 15 for you. He was number one at the All-Star break, and like he was a very popular drafted catcher last year because of his move to Atlanta. He was going to hit, a good lineup, and all that proved right. He had an injury. So like Sean Murphy is a guy that I'm very much interested in grabbing, because if the injury was the cause, like I'm perfectly happy to get the Sean Murphy of the first half, or even a downgraded version of that. And that could easily be a very quality top end catcher. Um, let's go ahead and move on to some of the second catcher items or guys. Hopefully we'll spend a little bit less time here, because I mean, we already talked like 1 through 15. There's not a huge difference. I think from here on, there's differences in these guys, but it's more of like, which bad piece do you want versus like they're all going to be the same.
Right. Yeah, no, completely. I think I have them broken out to a 16, I believe, the 16th catcher through, I want to say, 25th, it looks like. 16th through the 25th are kind of like, they're my second catcher. 16 through 25, and then after 25, it's like you're just basically,
Like, you're afraid.
you've punted, and you're probably going to need to replace them.
Yeah, you're me. You're me.
You're basically, you're in a two catcher league, and it might be AL or NL only. Like it's super deep. So 16, go ahead.
Yep. 16 is Luis Campusano. Last year in 49 games, he had 7 home runs, 27 and 30. This year, you have him projected for 12 home runs, no stolen bases, 49, 53, and 302 average. I mean, he's a guy who had some prospect pedigree. I feel like that faded off of him rather quickly as well, and even maybe before he got up to the majors, it started to fade, and the shine was wearing off a little bit. But still a guy that has some upside in entering his 25-year-old season.
Yeah. I think he's probably, like, I compared him to Luis Arias at catcher. I think he's probably a safe bet for average. Doesn't really have any power. Has no speed. It's fine. Like I was saying, I said his name earlier about like lineups, and then actually I remember the Padres are going to be awful. so so he might actually hit in a decent spot in a lineup, and I feel like he's not. I don't know. Like if you're the Padres, like, and they're also trying to move Kim. So if they move Kim, Campuzano could potentially hit leadoff even. He's a good average guy. So yeah, and why would they really don't have their number 2 is Higgy Ashoka, and they don't really have like any reason to not play Campuzano. So I don't know. I don't mind him in a two catcher situation. He feels like a safe-ish a second catcher. But I also have him as a second catcher, not a first catcher, for a reason. I mean, he's got like next to no power, literally no speed, and he's going to be in an awful lineup and could potentially be hitting in the bottom of that awful lineup. So yeah, it's not great, but as a second catcher, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's like in the like Keibert Ruiz starter kit right now. And like that's basically what I'm seeing, like a less power version of Ruiz, and that's kind of what I would expect from him. Number 17 is Gabriel Moreno. Last year he hit 284, 7 home runs, 6 stolen bases, 3350. You have projected for 9 home runs, 8 stolen bases, 4857, and 288. He hit 267 in the first half versus 313. It's another fairly significant average drop, or it not drop, change first half, second half. But I mean, it's not overly exciting. I don't think even
Just
even with
saw
the
the
high average.
Yeah, no, completely. Yeah, I just saw roster resource has him listed as the number 3 hitter. So if he hits 3, that would be really good. He's a number 1 catcher if he hits third. I don't see why they would hit him third though. That like they have Gurriel Jr. I don't see him hitting third.
Like
Honestly,
he's gonna hit in front of Christian Walker. Like why? Like what's
that
the
doesn't yeah it
that
doesn't
seems
really make
real
doesn't seem
sketch.
yeah I don't know. I mean, if he does that,
But
I
even
guess
5 wouldn't be bad. Like if he slips the 5,
yeah. I mean, that's not terrible, but like
it's
if
just
he's
not an exciting package.
it's just like such a boring line. Even if you give him 450 at bats, like you're looking at 14 homers and I don't know, maybe 10 steals, and I'm being real optimistic with that line. I mean, I haven't projected, like you mentioned, 9 homers, 8 steals, but if you give him even if you give him 15 homers and 12 steals, it's like it's so boring. I mean, it sounds okay and like
That's like a top like
no,
8 catcher, right?
no, absolutely. Oh, that would be a top 5 catcher if he had 450 at bats and in a good spot in the lineup. Like, don't get me wrong, but in reality, like in a 1 catcher league, you can't like a 15 homer, 12 steals. You would be so bored by that in a 1 catcher league. In a 2 catcher league, I mean, that sounds great. Actually, in a 2 catcher league, I would love it. But in a 1 catcher league, I mean, that's why I have him in this tier of like, the second catcher tier. Because I mean, I think in a second catcher league, that's a great line. In a 1 catcher league, that is so boring, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a swap in and out every week type of deal then.
yeah, you can't. I mean, honestly, you see that in a 1 catcher league. I feel like people reading the rankings would be like, "I'll take Gabby Marino. That sounds great." And then you get to like mid-April, and you're like, "Oh my god, he's so boring. So boring." It's it just is what it is. Okay, go ahead. Let's move along.
Yep. On 18 is Tyler Stevenson. Last year he had 243, 13 home runs, 59-56. He did miss a little bit of time. But with catchers, like if they miss a little time, it really doesn't show up as much because they're already going to miss some time. Regardless, you have him projected for 14 home runs, 1 stolen base, 56, 61, 258. This isn't a bad second catcher either. And, if you're pulling my draft every red you can find, Tyler Stevenson isn't the worst option as your second catcher.
Me and you, if we're in the same league, we are gonna be fighting over Reds, man.
I'll just take the Braves then, Gray. It's
I
fine.
am so excited about the Reds. Oh my god. You don't know how high I'm drafting Spencer Steer.
Is it higher than me? I don't know if it is. It's gonna be close.
Oh, okay. So Tyler Stevenson, I think he's also like you mentioned, he's a great second catcher. As a first catcher, yeah, it's gonna be boring. It's gonna be
So
very boring. So you can draft him if you like in a 1 catcher league, but I'm telling you, you are gonna be bored out of your mind. In a 2 catcher league, yeah, I mean it seems good. It seems solid. And honestly, it wasn't that long ago when he was touted as like a catcher, a prospect catcher who looked like he could hit 300 and had power in a good stadium. Like it wasn't that long ago, people were excited about Tyler Stevenson. So I'm fine with drafting him. I'm just saying, if you're in a one catcher league, you're gonna be so bored.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe like the poster boy for that tagline is our next guy at 19. Elias, if I wasn't in Colorado, I wouldn't be getting drafted. Diaz, 267, 14 home runs, one stolen base, 48, 72 last year. Young projected for 15 home runs, one stolen base, 52, 59, and 263. He is the epitome of a number two catcher, Gray.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He is so I actually really like Elias Diaz as a second catcher, like so much that I would even like. I mean, I don't know where he's going ADP. Let's see. Elias Diaz is going at 250. So in a second catcher league, like if I'm looking at my second catcher and I see him and I see other people like reaching and grabbing like the Tyler Stevensons of the world and Elias Diaz is there, I would reach a little bit to take Elias Diaz because I like him so much as a second catcher. As a first catcher, I would never draft him. In literally no leagues would I draft Elias Diaz in a one catcher league. But in a two catcher league, oh yeah, no, definitely. He's good for a two catcher league.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you went with like one of the younger upside type of guys, or maybe somebody you're not as sold on it at catcher one. Like he's just kind of a balancing average catcher. Moving on, number 20 is Mitch Garver. He signed in Seattle after half a season basically in Texas, 87 games, 270, 19 home runs. He hit 45 and 50. This year, you have him projected for 18 home runs, 41, 48, and a 255 average. Mr. Prorater at catcher. I mean, it's possible he gets like a full season one of these years. And like, if you're shooting at the end, I don't mind Mitch Garver, but like, that's what we're shooting for, right?
I was I was thinking that like I was thinking when yeah that is what we're shooting for, absolutely, you're correct, but I was thinking like what's the chances, like before I looked at his stats when he first got traded to the Mariners, I was like, oh man, like he could DH, he could get like 500 at bats, like what's the chances of that happening? And then I looked at his stats and I was like, wow, this guy barely ever plays even half a season, let alone like a
Yeah.
full. Like he's never even approached a full season, let alone like he's never approached 110 games this season, and he's been DHing. Like it's not like he's only been behind the plate, so that's why he doesn't play. Like he's played other. I mean he doesn't play. He doesn't play at all, man. He like never plays.
Yeah.
I never seen a guy like never stay on the field, and he's already 33 years old. So oh, it's actually yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, Mitch Carver.
Oh yeah, we're in the birthday phase of the podcast here too.
Yeah.
This is our gift. We recording
Yeah.
catchers to.
Oh
This is our
yeah.
gift to
Wait, yeah,
ourselves.
exactly. That's our gift to each other. When's your birthday again?
I'm tomorrow, which is the 17th. So the day
Yeah,
right
and then
before
on the
you. Yeah.
18th. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. Oh wow. It's Mitch Garver, then B Don, then me. We're the rushing nesting dolls of birthdays. Okay, let's move on.
All right, moving on. 21 is Alejandro Kirk. We all had a bunch of shares of Alejandro Kirk. 258 home runs last year, 34, 43. You have him projected for 10 home runs, 47, 51, and a 261 average. It was we had high hopes, Gray. We were like, just give him a job and he's gonna excel. He's gonna excel if he gets a job, guys. It's gonna happen. It didn't happen, Gray.
No. No, it didn't. I almost feel like because now, like, well, as of the recording of this, at least, like, it looks like he doesn't have to compete for at bats. Like, it looks like he could, like, potentially be the number one catcher and just play every day. More, as much as the number one catcher plays. Still only like 400 at bats, but still, like, you look at his projections for that. And even if he plays every day, you're like, what were we excited about? What? I can't even like galaxy brain myself into seeing his stats and projecting something good from them. I can't imagine what was good.
Guys, he could be Elias Diaz with average.
Yeah. Yeah, he could. Okay, let's move along.
Number 22. This is Shea Langoliers. Last year hit 205, 22 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 52-63. You have projected for 18 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 41, 49, and 212. I mean, we're in this area. There's a little bit of upside down here, but it lessens the further and further we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I am for 212 average. That might be optimistic. I don't know. He might hit 190. I don't know. The one thing that he really has going for him is the A's will just let him play as much as he wants to play. If he wants to go out there for 450 plus at bats, they'll let him. I mean, they're not going to hold him back. So I don't know if there's really room for him to DH necessarily, depending on what Brent Rooker does. But yeah, I think there could be at bats there, and then I mean, once you have at bats, you have a guy like Langoliers. He does have power, so could he basically be Cal Raleigh? Sure, yeah, he could. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't know if I'm drafting him like he's Cal Raleigh, but I mean, he could be. I would draft him as a second catcher and hope I got 25 homers and a 215 average.
Yeah, I think he could definitely be kind of a lower chance of happening Francisco Alvarez or Cal Raleigh type. But it could happen. So, I mean, again, power here in the bottom, you're going to have to sacrifice something in this area. For Shea, it's probably your average. Ryan Jeffers at 23, 96 games last year. He had 276, 14 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 46-43. You have projected for 15 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 48, 50, and a 226 average. You hear the line, you're like, why do you have him so low? And why do you have him projected for that average, Gray? Well, he's not very good. So that's one, but I'll let you go on about Ryan Jeffers here, Gray.
He's not very good. So there's that problem. Yeah, I mean, I think there's also the issue, besides him not being very good.
He's going to be the number one catcher just because I said that, and somebody's going to play this back to him.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's a defense first catcher, right? And also, I think beyond all that, there's also the issue of Baldelli. He would mix and match with his wife and his mother if he could. I mean, he mixes and matches everything. I don't even know what the Twins have zero matchup a bit, like they have no matchups in their on their bench or anything, but somehow they're still gonna play matchups. he's Baldelli's the one guy who switches out a righty for another righty. It's like, what's that gonna do? You look at their depth chart. It's like Ryan Jeffers, who's a righty, and his backup is Christian Vasquez, who's a righty. What are you doing? Okay, I guess you gotta I don't know. Christian Vasquez, by the way, could be the number one Twins catcher easily. If we got to April and it was Baldelli was oh, Vasquez is my number one and Jeffers is number two, that also wouldn't shock me. So I don't have 100% faith in Ryan Jeffers because he's not very good. He does have a decent enough glove though, so I guess I'm assuming he plays more than Vasquez. But this might be one of those 50-50 splits for no reason other than Baldelli just likes to play matchups, even though there are no matchups there to play.
Look, I'm playing them, okay? I know what I'm doing, and don't worry about it that we signed 2 defensive catchers who can't hit for anything. It's fine. worry about it. I will say, like, Jeffers did have, the very solid second half where he hit 294 with 10 home runs. So, like, again, you galaxy brain and prorate yourself out to like 22 home runs and 6 stolen bases and a 290 average. All of a sudden, he's like the number one catcher. Um, but like that's a 350 BABIP that it could happen, but I don't see anything in like the numbers in the second half that show that he changed anything to produce results. Number 24, Danny Jansen, 86 games last year, 228, 17 home runs, 38, 53. Young projected for 16 home runs, 1 stolen base, 46, 49, and a 228 average. I don't know really. It's Danny Jansen. I don't know what to say when we get down to these bottom catchers, Gray. There's not fun numbers for me to poke around in. It's just like, well, they were pretty bad the entire time. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this for Danny Jansen. He's not good he's not good when he plays a lot, but when he plays not a lot, he is good.
When has he ever played a lot? He doesn't play a lot, Gray. Don't give me this.
I don't know why. Like, it's so weird to go, like, Danny Jansen is like, he'll hit 17 homers in like 300 plate appearances, or he'll hit 17 homers in like 500 plate appearances. I don't know why that is, but that's Danny Jansen basically. What I don't understand just about like other people's, because I'm looking now at like other people's projections for his at bats and his plate appearances, and they have him like above anywhere he's ever been in his career. Like right now, I gotta ask Rudy,
because they don't have another catcher right now. It's because he's penciled in for more DH than he's ever done. Sorry,
right?
Kirk is the catcher.
But that goes back to what I was saying with like, he's never gonna he may right now be the DH, right? And you get to like middle of April, and it's like, I don't like Schneider's gonna be playing like Spencer Horwitz at DH or something. Like, it's like you think Danny Jansen's the DH, but you know he's not gonna stay as the DH like for longer than a week or two, even if he enters the season as the DH. I don't know, because even Rudy has him for more plate appearances at 393, which is, I mean, for most catchers, that's not a lot. But for Danny Jansen, that would be more than he's ever had in his career in one season. I don't know. I mean, maybe he does it. I don't know. It just doesn't seem very plausible.
I think it's the DH, and he's currently projected to hit cleanup for them. I don't know that either of those sticks or is any kind of permanent position.
Never happened.
But I think that's what's driving the stronger projection. I will say I'm a little bit higher than you do, just because there's some room for the average to go up, and like 240 17 is what you're getting from like every catcher. So it just kind of falls in to that grouping. Austin Wells,
he feels like Mitch Garver basically with, less average, and almost exactly the same scenario where it's like, if you give Mitch Garver 530 at bats, then you're going to project him for 45 homers. It's probably not happening. Danny Jansen, I feel like it's the same situation where it's like, if you give him 500 at bats, yeah, he's going to look really good. But I just don't see how he would suddenly get so many, plate appearances or at bats. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, sorry. I will say like this, and the why he's in this top 25 where you kind of laid the cutoff, though, is that there is that potential for something to happen after 25. Yeah. We're losing a lot of that potential for anything to happen. Yeah. Barring like some crazy situations with some I don't know, guys who probably aren't even ranked. Austin Wells is at 25. I think it's the last guy we're going to touch on in any kind of depth. We'll maybe name a couple of catchers after here that we like. But 19 games last year, very small sample. He had 229 with 4 home runs. You have projected for 13 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 43, 45, and a 233 average. Pretty much in line with what Rudy has him. Maybe a little bit more on the counting stats, but that's about it. I mean, Austin Wells is fine. He should have a job, which is maybe the biggest piece for him at this point. With and then of course some prospect pedigree as well, but we really haven't seen anything from him yet.
No, we have not. That's not really much of anything. But like you said, I mean, in AAA, he did hit 5 homers in 33 games, and in AA, he hit 11 homers in 58 games. Like, he has shown some power. Yankee Stadium's not a bad place, for a lefty. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I have him as a second catcher that I'm willing to, hold my nose and draft him, but I'm not excited about it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much where we are at in the point in the rankings. Uh, like you said, he's a lefty in Yankee Stadium that's shown power. So there's potential for something to happen. They have Trevino there. It feels like there's going to be a pretty strong split between those two as they kind of get Wells acclimated to catching at the major league level. So I really like I kind of like Wells maybe as a pickup later, but I really don't know he's going to play enough early on for me to even draft him in a 2 catcher league other than like an AL only type.
Yeah.
All right, Gray. So we've covered top 25. That seems pretty far enough for us in catchers. Let's pick a few out though from here on that you like or that maybe you are looking at taking a shot on if you miss out on those 25, or if say you draft two and you get an injury and you need to come out into say the free agent pool and grab one of these guys.
Okay, so I'm going to stretch the definition of like for for these catchers because I don't know if I'd say like.
You would accept as a person that can sit in
Maybe,
a roster spot
maybe in a
temporarily.
draft and hold, maybe in an NL or AL only. Okay, so I mean, not great, but there's something to I you mentioned earlier about Sean Murphy having not a great second half, being banged up or whatever, and Travis Desarnaud as like a backup. If you're doing backups, like he is as about as locked in as a backup as you're gonna find for a really good lineup. So you gotta like assume Sean Murphy's not going to be okay, and that's why Travis Desarnaud's getting the at bats. But if he were to get into that lineup, it's a good lineup. So worse things could happen, and that's really like he's free in just about any draft, even in like draft and hold leagues. Like he's going at like 450, 500 overall. So yeah, I mean you could take a flyer on him. There's also one more guy I'll say, who I also mentioned earlier, Nick Fortes, the Marlins catcher. He is definitely the Marlins catcher, as at least as of right now. But he should be. I don't see why they would go out and get a different catcher. So he is the catcher. And Bethancourt is there as well. But, Bethancourt's always been more of like maybe DH, play around the field a little bit. So Fortes, if Fortes plays, and he just came off of a season where he played 108 games, so you would assume going forward he'd continue to be the number one catcher. So going into last year, Fortes was, I mean, there was some heat on him. It wasn't a lot, but there was a little bit of like, he had some power, some speed, and he hit for an okay enough average with a decent enough contact rate. I'm not saying he's going to be great, but you could see Nick Fortes if he gets the at-bats and he makes good contact and he grows into some power. I mean, there was a thought at some point he was going to be a 280 hitter. So I mean, he's interesting and basically free in all drafts. So yeah, there's two names for you.
Yeah, I don't mind either of those names. I'm going to go kind of in a full upside shot type of direction, which is, Tyler Soderstrom is he's with the A's, so he should have some capability to just play. If they decide that that's what they want to do with him, he has legitimate power. He had 21 home runs in 77 games in AAA last year. He's been a prospect with high pedigree, so that's an interesting name. Just if you're just chasing at the bottom and kind of in that vein, and I think he's probably going earlier and has a better maybe shot at getting um, full playing time as Henry Davis with the Pirates. Another guy who's a top end prospect. I don't know if he's necessarily been guaranteed a starting job, but he played 62 games last year. He's another guy that I think could potentially take a little bit of a step forward, just after getting a first look at the majors.
All right.
Yeah, there's just a couple guys. If you want to be boring, you can always take Christian Vasquez, who's always sitting there, always willing to be a catcher too if you're completely screwed. That's usually my go-to, Gray. All right, Gray. We've covered a lot on catchers. If you have anything else specific to catchers, you can always get us on Twitter. I'm at RazBeaton. Gray is, of course, the owner of the at Razzball account. You can comment on youtube.com/Razzball Fantasy under the videos. We'll answer out there as well. If you are looking for leagues, we have the RCLs. Those will be posted at some point. We also have, we're taking entries for the podcast league and the Win B-Don's Money League. Really rewarding the people who stuck through an hour and 40 minutes of catcher talk to hear some of these league announcements. So those are out there as well. We'll be back to talk first base next time. Gray, have a happy birthday, and I'll talk to you later, bud.
Happy birthday to you too, man.